Today's talk, I wanted to ask you about pelvic floors because, it's an area of my interest, and you and I have had many conversations over the years about pelvic floors, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't. And for the purposes of this talk, we're going to refer to the two pelvises as male and female. But sometimes when we disagree, you say, well, that's fine because you have a female pelvis and I don't know what that's like, and I have a male pelvis and you don't know what that's like, and that is true. So with that introduction, I would love if you would say what you feel the most primary differences of the two pelvises are. Do you feel it's more important in regards to yoga in the structural, the bone muscle complex, or the organ complex, or do you feel like they're equal importance, just different effects on each from those? Would you mind speaking to the differences?
See, when I say that you have a female pelvis and I have a male pelvis and we will never quite entirely know each other, I can know a lot about the female pelvis by looking at anatomical structure, of which there is a lot of pictures and things available. But I don't feel the pelvis.
Right.
Okay. And that feeling can never change. Never change. I would compare it to books on psychology written by females about male psychology and vice versa. And I always had a question in my mind, like, how can they know? All they know is the information they've got from outside. So I read a lot of books, I read a lot of books about female psychology. And then I see there's a difference between female in the Western world, female in Africa, female in India, and those are different. But even when I read all of that, ultimately I end up at intellectually guessing what it is. I can never know per se. Same is true with the pelvis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the psychology of the pelvis, if I can call it psychology, the feeling, can never be known by the opposite sex. Nor is it meant to be known. Intellectually, you can know a lot about the shape and the size and difference in shapes, but you cannot know the deeper part.
So the wonderful thing about the different pelvises, is there is a lot of similarity. So a lot of the instruction can be the same physically, but
with regard to the similarity.
Yeah. So you're talking about the psychological difference, but I think the most obvious difference structurally is the perineum. In the female is smaller. And then also structurally, the interior of the pelvic outlet, the interior part of the pelvis, is wider in the female body. Also, I think it's true that the tailbone in the male body is a little more forward just naturally. So those are the things I can think of just off the top of my head structurally. Do you feel that is something that needs to be addressed in the instructions of pelvic floor work, Mula Bandha?
I think it's important to know the difference. In teaching yoga or in practice of yoga, very, very, very few people can actually feel the difference. So let's get back to why we do yoga.
Okay.
It's for the enlightenment, where my brain has to work correctly. For the brain to work correctly with regard to the physical body and asana practice, the most important part is the breath. So without considering whether it's a male or a female, I would go to how the breath feels, both in the pelvic area as well as how does the breath feel in the brain. Let that be the continuous reference point rather than it's a male or a female.
Okay. So when cueing for pelvic floor and or Mula Bandha, would you...
What do you mean by cueing?
Giving instructions.
Okay.
Would you, basically they would be the same for all bodies?
Not same, but similar.
Similar. Okay. And then do you want to say anything about the difference between the organs? So sometimes you read, oh, well, the prostate is, the equivalent of the uterus, and the structure is completely different.
It's not.
So, yeah, exactly. So there's a big difference there. Do you want to say anything about that energetically, or?
Energetically, there is a lot of difference. How significant it is for a particular person practicing varies. Somebody who is very strong, like as strong as an oxen, let's say, for example. Okay? For that person, the practice is different. He does not have to emphasize, or she does not have to emphasize strength in the practice so much. They have to emphasize flexibility. On the other hand, you take somebody who is very flexible but physically weak, has to emphasize something different, obviously. If I compare even two animals, they're both mammals, a dog and a horse, but they're very different. But are they completely different? No. There are similarities and there are differences. Recognizing those differences and similarities, one has to practice. Same with men and women. Okay? But rather than only look at the difference between this is a man, this is a female, with regard to some things that obviously applies. Okay? But with regard to many other things, two men can be compared in a very different way than a man and a female. Okay? If I take a very strong female and not particularly strong man, those two might be energetically very similar.
Right.
Like in yoga, the part that came up in the later years of Master Mr. Iyengar's teaching, that the female should not practice arm balances. Okay? I personally don't agree with that. It depends on who the female is. Very strong female would not have that problem. But his opinion was that it dries up the uterus. Now, talking to Mr. Iyengar, I discovered that his opinion was based on 2 or 3 females that he worked with. How can that be generalized to all females?
Plus, he doesn't have that experience himself.
He doesn't have that experience. Very, very good with his observation and conclusions. But when the conclusion is based on observation of a few samples, you cannot generalize that to everybody. And yet, one has to take precaution that this can happen to a female.
How would a female even know that her uterus was drying? I mean, what is he basing that on? What he
Having
sees?
difficulty with childbirth.
I see.
Now, if a woman either doesn't want a child,
Right.
or is past that stage,
Right. That doesn't apply.
it doesn't apply. Some of the strongest arm balance is done by a human being that I have seen, were definitely by women. Okay? But if I take the strongest woman that I saw that way and the strongest man, the man is still stronger because his physiology is different.
Right. So I want to eventually get to talk to you a little bit about Mula Bandha today, but before we talk about that, because of the work that I do with pelvic floor and my history of having pelvic pain and a tight pelvic floor, I have ended up working with that population quite a bit. And yet in the yoga world, there's this incredible fascination with Mula Bandha. And everybody wants to do it, and I ask them why they want to do it, and there's like a million different answers. Oh, my energy's leaking out, or it'll make me stronger. There's all these answers, but I feel from what I know about the body in yoga that if your pelvic floor is tight, that isn't something that's going to help you right now. That you have to address that initially. So I'd love you to comment on that.
I was going to say Western men, for example,
Okay.
but I find that that's not a good term. There are men in the West who are different, more like what is Indian supposed to be. And there are men in India that we come across in yoga world who are more like Western men.
Right.
Yeah.
But when you say like, is it the habits of sitting all the time, or is it a psychological holding, or
both sitting and the kind of opening they have. The sort of more educated men in India that I would call westernized don't sit on the floor as children.
Right.
And so their pelvis is very different, tight in a very different way. Yeah? Whereas if you take a villager in India, for him to squat and sit in Baddha Konasana is no big deal.
Right.
He doesn't even think of it as an asana.
Right. So, for the purposes of this video, I'm assuming most people watching it will be Westerners. And I have worked with a lot of men that come to me, usually for pelvic pain, and their pelvic floor muscles are very, very tight. So, can you comment on which their path should be? I want to see if you agree with me. Should their path be to stretch and release that area before they even think about doing anything like Mula Bandha?
I don't think it's completely exclusive that way. Okay? Like ultimate intent is enlightenment. And to say that until your body and breath is perfect, not to look at enlightenment would be incorrect.
Right.
You can do both simultaneously. How much of what is emphasized by a particular person should largely be their decision. You can guide them for sure. You can advise them that, your pelvic floor is very tight. You should work more on opening the pelvis rather than strengthening it. Yeah? But ultimately, it is to be their decision as long as they bear in mind what is the ultimate intent. That if that ultimate intent is forgotten, then you can forget about the whole thing altogether.
Well, you can say it should be their decision, but they're also coming to me or you as a teacher for guidance. So
I would ask them, like, what do you want? Why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
If they say, I just want to feel I'm not interested in this enlightenment stuff.
Right. I just want my pelvis
then I would emphasize that.
Right. Well, okay. I'd love for you to comment. I know that you have just recovered from prostate cancer. And a lot of the men that I've worked with that come to me have had their prostate removed. And then they want to say, oh, I want to strengthen my pelvic floor. And their doctors have told them to do Kegels. And first I ask them what's a Kegel, and second I look at their bodies, and a lot of them are very tight. They are more posterior tilted, a more tucked pelvis. And then if I look at their breath pattern, I'm generalizing here, but a lot of them are what I call reverse breathers, where when I tell them to take a deep breath in, they pull their belly in and up and fill up their chest. And so I would love for you to talk about what your thoughts are about Kegels, prostate cancer, men pushing their chest out to take a deep breath.
I read a long time ago, when people are talking of Kegel, I wanted to see what Dr. Kegel said. And what I found was Dr. Kegel, as much as I could understand his language, is talking about integrity of the entire pelvic floor. And when I see people teaching Kegel exercise, including at well-known hospitals, after my surgery, for example, what the nurse told me to do with Kegel was completely different. It's a very narrow lift they're talking about, which is not what Dr. Kegel addressed. How
did they describe it to you?
They said to you to, like if you are urinating, try and hold the urine.
Right. So that's very urethrocentric. I know that's not a word, but right?
Yeah. And I did not tell the particular nurse who was then talking to me, because that's what they have learned, that's what they're advocating.
Right.
But later, one of the nurses who works for that particular physician who did my surgery came to me as a yoga student, and we discussed this. And I did tell her that what you are teaching in name of Dr. Kegel is not Kegel exercise. But I find all of you in medical profession that I have come across do the same thing. There are specialists who just concentrate on that, but they're concentrating on the wrong thing.
That's what I say. Also, the urethra, if you put your brain more to the urethra, it's more in the front of the pelvic floor, so it's not getting the whole thing.
Right.
And then what I've read about Dr. Cagle is when he first started teaching his exercises that he, it was called a parentometer, which was kind of an early ultrasound device that they put in the vaginal canal and had women squeeze it. So then I thought, okay, it's becoming vaginal centric. And really, I like to teach from the perineum, but I don't know if you agree with that. So that, because that's where everything comes together at the perineum, all of the muscles are plugged into that area.
See, let's look at something that's called Ashwini Mudra, okay? Which is, in anatomical terms, it would be holding your anal sphincter. Okay? I find some people get a lot of help by first doing Ashwini Mudra, then trying to do Mula Bandha.
Right.
And then there are some people to whom that doesn't matter at all.
Right.
Okay? Ultimately, the idea, if I use Iyengar teaching, is separate everything minutely and try to work with each thing separately, which is the ultimate aim.
Right.
But that ultimate aim may not apply to every beginner.
I agree completely, and also it matters what the issue that the person is dealing with, right? Is it in the front or the back or the left or the
Absolutely.
right? Yeah. But I've also found some longtime yoga practitioners that can't distinguish the pelvic floor very well, and I've worked with beginners who can distinguish it very easily. So you would say that's karma?
That's what?
That's karma?
Ultimately, everything is karma.
Okay. Okay, so that's the Kegel, and then
Karma means effect of your past actions. So everybody has karma.
of course, but some people have better. I'm just saying, like the person off the street who's never done yoga has good body awareness, and people who are doing.
But there may be good reason for it. The fact that we can't find those reasons is neither here nor there. There is always a reason why somebody has more awareness and somebody doesn't.
Well, the pushback I get a little bit from the medical community is when I say be more specific, or don't tell people to cut off the urine stream as a pelvic floor lift. They say, oh, well, these people they can't feel anything, or they don't feel things that specifically. And I say, well, maybe they do, or let's ask them to. Like, why can't we be more specific? I think it's better.
See, the trouble with medical system, if I can call it trouble, is when I go to a doctor, in spite of my knowledge, I tend to have an attitude that I don't know, they know. Both are incorrect. I know something and the doctor doesn't know everything.
Right.
Yeah? But it takes some time and some conversation, some trust for the doctor to admit that he doesn't know, because of the litigious situation we have in the country.
Right. Would you be willing to speak a little bit about your own recovery, and like what you were told by your doctor to do, and then as a yogi,
No, my recovery had much more difficulty with the little ulcer that was found in the stomach. So let's not talk about that, not because I don't want to talk about it, but it doesn't apply to many people.
Well, I mean less that issue than just the recovery of your pelvic floor from the surgery.
It was affected largely by the ulcer I had.
I see, okay.
So if I talk about it would not be relevant.
Okay. So let's say somebody comes to you, a man comes to you that had his prostate removed, who's relatively healthy, but they have tight pelvic floor. Would you give them, I know it depends on the person, we're talking generally here, but would you instruct them to, if they're a little bit on the tighter side, would you instruct them to do anything specifically that you've learned from your own experience of having this done?
Not being a medical doctor, I would ask that person to say, look, I can show you some things. You better check it with your doctor if it applies to you or not. Okay? But my suggestion to a person who is tight like that is say, let's begin with Baddha Konasana. And in general, I would find the Western man or the Westernized Indian man to be very tight in that posture.
Right.
I have also come across Indians who, when I ask them to do something, they'll say, oh, as children we used to do this and I can do it. So yeah, but you're not a child anymore. Let me see what your body does now. And they are very tight.
Yeah.
maybe they will recover from that tightness faster than someone who has never done that as a child.
Yeah.
So it would be very individual, which you already suggested. But after watching them, only I can be more specific and say either modify this or do something very different.
Okay.
To an average Indian person, if we can call it average, I would say practice standing poses. That's where their weakness is. To an average Westerner, I would say sit on the floor and practice something like Baddha Konasana.
Anything else? Any other seated pose you would recommend specifically?
All the seated poses, really. Okay. But kind of leg lifts we do lying on the floor would apply to both, because that addresses very different part of the anatomical system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what about the part where I have observed prostate cancer survivors that have this not very healthy breathing pattern? I think it's a military. It comes maybe from the military, of kind of pull your stomach in and stick your chest out type of thing. I remember commenting to you about it a few years ago, and you said, "Oh, that may have possibly contributed to their cancer, just having the the posterior tilt of their pelvis and the unhealthy breathing pattern." Could you say a little more about that?
Again, I'm guessing
Yeah.
from whatever experience I have and whatever conversations I have. I would, in my mind, I would compare human beings in general to what did people do long before chairs and tables were discovered. People squatted a lot. That habit has, in most cultures, completely disappeared.
Yeah.
That's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So, to look at yoga as something that provides strength, it would not be a correct approach. Yoga is meant to create health, which may not necessarily, it will give some strength, but that's not the intention. The intention is health. So when I look at what is health, I look at it from Ayurvedic point of view, which is saying, is your digestive system working fine, particularly the eliminative part? So that's where the emphasis would go. So I don't do this, but if you went to a good Ayurvedic physician in India, one of the first questions he would ask you before looking at anything else is, how is your bowel movement? Because if that is gone wrong, many other things will go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? In the Western world, even medical world, this is not emphasized at all.
Right.
Okay? Including to go to a hospital, somebody just had a surgery, heart surgery even. They're giving him stuff to eat that is, by their own knowledge, they should know that this is ridiculous. Give the food that is easier to digest, because until that is corrected, many other things will go wrong.
Okay.
And it's almost shocking to see the kind of food that is available in the hospital.
I would agree with that. So back to my question about the posterior tilt and the reverse breathing, I thought a little bit about you telling me that could have been contributing to their prostate cancer. And I thought about it when someone's living in more of a posterior tilt in a male body, it's putting a lot of pressure down on their prostate, right?
Yeah, I would say a wrong anatomical habit like that would, more than anything else, it would affect the blood circulation, which immediately affects the health of the area. I would not say it causes cancer.
Right.
But I think there is a tendency to have cancer. This would make it worse.
Right. Yeah.
But the Western science understands extremely little, even though they understand less than they admit about circulation or energy flow. To you, I can directly give an example of Zhuhang. Okay? What does it mean that somebody can touch you and give you because we don't have the language, we express it in the most possible Western language that it feels like 200-300 volts of electricity. But that's not what it is. It's something very different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how can a human being doing this qigong with his arms and touching you give you that kind of jolt? When after giving you the jolt, he holds your shoulders and turns you around and you don't feel any of that jolt. Right? And yet the next time he does that, sure enough,
right,
like when you had your shoulders, you're holding my shoulders and he was giving me this energy, you felt it. And it goes like, wow.
We don't have any research on that in the medical
No research.
Right.
Okay. When I come to the Western world and I tell my good engineering friends that this is what happened, are you sure he did not have some hidden wire or something?
Yeah.
No. he was in a bedroom
in a hotel room. That was one of our hotel rooms, so he couldn't have wired.
And he was lifting his sleeves up.
Yeah.
And if you want to hear more about it, he came all the way to America and was doing it here.
But nobody wanted to research it.
No one to research it.
So from an energetic standpoint, then the prostate isn't getting as healthy energy flow, you're saying. And then can you comment a little bit about that breathing pattern of the pulling in and up on the inhale and letting go on the exhale, like as a strategy going through life? Like what would be the effect of that on someone? Because I see it a lot in, I would say 90% of the women I work with that have pelvic pain have that breath pattern. And I had it myself and had to really work on getting rid of it.
Now, even though these people who come to you have a specific problem, I would say that can be generalized to the entire human population.
You mean that breath pattern?
A wrong breath pattern will cause problems.
Yeah.
Anatomically, we know what a correct breath pattern is. That cannot be changed for anybody.
Right.
That is the pattern.
Yeah.
If can one go by feeling? Okay. Yes, provided certain basic facts are there. If my pattern of breathing is incorrect, I cannot go by feeling to correct it. I have to be taught the correct pattern.
Yes.
For that, some logic is necessary. I get very amused by questions like, I was having a discussion with somebody and they asked me about, how do you know this? I said, I saw it on TV. And their question to me was, do you believe everything you see on TV? This is a typical California question. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I have learned to answer it in a very different way. I ask the person, do you disbelieve everything you see on TV?
Good answer.
Just because it's on TV is neither right nor wrong. You are still left to judge yourself what is correct. I would apply the same technique to people who come to you and have reverse breathing. To say, just because you see it this way, it's not correct.
Yeah.
There is a correct way of breathing. And there is a logical pattern about it. You can't go by your feeling.
Right. And most people are open to it and understand when I explain the anatomy of good breathing to them why they should not be breathing that way, and they work towards not breathing that way. But I'm interested energetically, what, like a long-term pattern of that. And I find that sometimes it's rooted in trauma, some type of horrible thing that happened to somebody. And a lot of people have had a lot of horrible things happen to them. So, we clench when something bad is happening, we go, and then that pattern tends to remain. So I can speak from my own experience that letting go of that was definitely some trauma in my life that I needed to let go of, and that it caused more anxiety, right? So like breathing like that is contributed to my anxiety. But can you say anything else about that?
Yeah, I would compare it to an addiction. Somebody, let's say, who is alcoholic, knows he is alcoholic, wants to get rid of it. Okay? To tell that person don't drink is not helpful at all. Okay? something else has to be processed which is much deep-seated.
Right. Why are you drinking?
Why are you drinking? Okay. I am reminded of a famous story, correct story, where there was a particular person, let's call him Maharajji, who was a right-hand man of Mahatma Gandhi, whose primary function, helping Gandhiji's work, was to go to villages and try to get these people to drop drinking, not drink. And one particular village he would go to, this man he knew wanted to give up drinking, but could not. So he had talked to him often, and it did not have desired effect. He would drop drinking for a while, but then Maharaj is not always there, so he would start again. So one day Maharajji goes to the village. This man is even expecting him. But he talks to the wife like, where is your husband? She says, well, he's drunk. So Maharaj says, all right, I will go up and sit on your terrace. Whenever he comes out of his stupor, ask him to come and see me. So after several hours, this man says, Maharajji was going to come. Where is he? He says, he has been sitting all night up on the terrace, waiting for you. And he said that you should go and see him. So this man goes up to the terrace to see him. And Maharaj is sitting in some kind of meditation in tears. So the man says, what happened? Why are you crying? He says, I'm crying because I don't know what is wrong with me, that I cannot change you. See, complete twist of there is something wrong with you, instead into what is it in me that doesn't have the desired effect. And apparently, well, the story is that the man stopped drinking completely.
That's a beautiful way to think about
any problem of any conflict.
Right, the trauma of someone. If someone has that pattern of breath because of a trauma, they need to address the trauma, or someone needs to help them find a way to address it.
Yes, how would you help them? As far as yoga is concerned, the biggest help you give is by first praying. Any help you attempt to give without prayer does not work at this level. That's why, you know, in a proper yoga class, before every class begins, we say an invocation. Is Patanjali there listening to us? No. That prayer does something to you, if you have the right attitude. And I've seen in America, like when I've taught, particularly in places like Texas, finally somebody gathers enough courage to tell me that, you know, we don't like this Patanjali invocation. So I asked, like, why? Well, it's, you know, we are Christians. Say a Christian prayer. The idea is not to pray to Patanjali.
Right. Yeah.
Say some prayer in whatever faith you have. But say a prayer.
Okay, so that helps the teacher help the student, or a student that is aware they have that, they can pray.
It shifts the responsibility.
Yeah.
A person who is doing something wrong is not responsible for that wrong thing. Some pattern is causing him to do it, which has a trauma background.
Right.
Okay? Deal with that.
Okay, and then on the, I want to call it physical level or organic level, someone that has that pattern is holding their lower body tightly all the time, which isn't good for a lot of physical things, like you talked about elimination. What do you feel the psychological effect of that is? Again, talking generalities, I know it's every person's different, but is it become like expression in the world of tightness or anxiety or fear?
All anxiety, all fear has a basis in not believing in God. Belief is a very dangerous word, very misused.
Because it also denotes doubt.
Yeah, and
I say I believe rather than I know, that's a very different thing.
When we talk of belief, we are talking of not non-verifiable religious belief. It has to have some basis, not an imaginary story. Go with belief that is verifiable first. Then if it leads you to look at other belief, then see, is there any proof available of that? Or is it simply somebody saying it? The thing has to begin with, we are getting into a different conversation here. What is God? The Judeo-psychological structure of what God is very different to what we have in yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Or even more different than what we have in Vedanta.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be based on some logical conclusion. Logic being that my observation of all human beings, is that whenever something intelligent happens, there is an underlying intelligence. My eye functions, amazing camera, take pictures after pictures after pictures, and doesn't seem to suffer from what camera suffers from. It is limitless ability to take pictures. Now that is superb intelligence. You can call it nature if you like, people do. Okay? But behind that intelligent thing functioning, there has to be an intelligence. So our idea of God is that here is the universe that functions amazingly intelligently.
Mm-hmm.
Planets don't crash into each other and stuff like that. Although some of that happens, on the whole it functions in an amazing manner. So there is an underlying intelligence. If you want to call it nature, fine, then that is God. That is our definition of God, which is very different to Judeo-Christian definition.
Okay, how are you relating that to my question? Sorry.
That when we say begin with a prayer.
No, not the prayer part. The part about what's the energetic response of the body of someone that's kind of held and tightened.
Because they think they are the body and the mind.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Can you understand that you are something much different than the body and the mind? Okay? It won't immediately cure the problem, but it will help a pattern of thinking.
Okay.
I'm coming from a background of spiritual aspect.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that is much more fundamental. When I teach yoga, although if you say, my knee hurts, I have something to suggest about the knee. I'm more interested in how that translates to, first of all, the free pranic movement, and secondly, to your understanding of who you are. Let's say somebody comes to you.
Yeah.
You see that they're tight pelvic floor. Is your approach that you are going to help them?
Correct, yes.
That's the wrong approach.
Okay. What's the right approach?
Right approach is you pray that may something come through you with divine intervention. You may not say it, but that's what you want to feel in yourself. Otherwise, and be careful with what I'm saying, their sickness will affect you.
Mm-hmm. And
you can't let that happen.
Sometimes I say this is a collaboration. You have to give me feedback for me to be able to adjust things, and I want to empower that person to not have
You
to
can't
come
empower the person. Only
with
God
knowledge.
empowers.
Well, with knowledge of how they can help themselves.
No, I would not have that attitude.
Okay. Say more.
If you come to me with a problem, even as I'm attempting to help you,
Yeah.
my deeper inner understanding should be, may God help you.
And at the same time, you're going to give me some tools, aren't you?
Yes, but not owning those tools. I am not going to help you. Through me, something might come that may help you. I don't have any ownership over that technique.
Okay. That's helpful.
Big difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You saw Zhuang,
Yep.
very deeply affected by Chinese current approach, where they've dropped God altogether out.
Mm-hmm.
God that is sitting up there controlling things is not the God we are talking about,
Mm-hmm.
or I am talking about.
Right.
Okay. But Zhuang giving some treatment, and as a result having to hold his belly and go into the bathroom and throw up, this generally would not happen to an Ayurvedic physician.
Right. Because he's taking stuff on, right? Is that?
Because he's taking stuff on.
Mm-hmm.
And the way not to take the stuff on is to not make yourself the doer. All the doing comes from an amazingly different source.
I understand.
So in our conversation, we seem to have a gap.
Well, okay, the last conversation that we had was about the levels of yoga and how the level of practitioner starts with making shapes, and then it's the physiological, and then the organic. And so I'm also approaching it from that, is
Okay.
that it's I know that the levels intertwine and cross each other, and at the same time I would say the general yoga practitioner who stumbles into a class at a gym, but then they say, wow, I really like this yoga thing, I want to get more into it, and then they go to a studio and then they try to find a different teacher or whatever. I mean, that's kind of an evolution, isn't it, of what their understanding of what
That's
yoga
a kind
is.
of steps, yeah, if you
Yeah.
want to call it evolution,
Yeah.
fine. When a baby is hungry, you don't discuss philosophy with the baby,
It's true.
right? You feed the baby. And it's interesting to see when a baby, a newborn infant or even little older infant is hungry, basically it wants milk. You do not offer chemically derived,
Right.
sophisticated protein to the baby.
I also don't tell it to pray.
You don't tell it to pray, absolutely, yeah. The giver has to pray.
Right.
The mother breastfeeding the baby has to pray. The baby doesn't have to pray.
I know, I'm kidding.
Yeah. And forget the baby, even as an older person, okay, exactly the same food, cooked with the same ingredients by my mother was different than someone else cooking it. And certainly the hotel food never matched it. Now the ingredients are the same, it's the same chemicals, same person is eating. Why does it taste different?
The energy she put into it and your attachment to your mother.
You're right. The primary energy of love is there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. To tell somebody who is only educated in the sophisticated Western manner, nothing wrong with that education, but it's not complete. Because if you tell them that, this energy feels different, they would not have any clue about what you're talking about.
Right.
So they say, okay, if that's what you believe, it's not what I believe, it's a fact.
Right. Yeah. They're saying your experience isn't real, and it is. Yeah.
Even something at a physical level. Somebody's in Virasana. The very first time I went to India, I saw this. Somebody's in Virasana, already struggling with Virasana because the quads are tight and so on. And any weight put on that person's thigh would feel horrible, I would imagine. Mr. Angas goes and stands on it. And I feel like, oh my God, he's torturing me, this student. I asked the student later, says, no, that felt wonderful. And if I talk to a doctor,
He would say, don't do that, it's
Don't do that,
dangerous.
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
and the doctor is wrong. Experience suggests that the doctor is incorrect in what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I turned 65, being in America, I'm asked to go to, for a full medical checkup. The person says to me, sit like this and touch your toes. Oh, you're double jointed. No, I'm not double jointed. This is normal. You are anti-double jointed.
That's funny. Okay, point taken. Well, I was going to ask you some questions about Mula Bandha, but perhaps we should do that another time for our next talk.
Let's talk about it.
You want to talk about Mula Bandha? Okay.
Every book on yoga written by ancient people, if
Yeah.
you will.
But Master Key is not ancient, and that's the one that's
Master
really...
Key is not
okay.
ancient.
So I just want to make that distinction.
Was with the emphasis that this can only be learned from a teacher. You cannot learn it from books.
Okay.
The tendency today, maybe because our teachers are not available, but try to learn from the book. From the book you can gather certain amount of information, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But it cannot teach you to do the thing correctly. That is only learned by experience.
Okay. Well, okay. On that subject, the older classic books do say all the same thing as you're saying, but they were all written by men, and maybe you could say for men. I don't know if you agree with that.
You can't say that.
Yeah, okay.
They're written by men.
They're written by men, but they're written, the interpretations that I've read are written in the male body form.
And written by males.
Right.
Okay.
So...
Whereas when the ancient taught, if a female came to them, they would address it differently.
My point is just that the books that exist are written in the male, like they refer to the male body when they're telling you instructions.
But what about the idea that you cannot learn it from books?
I agree with that, and I want to just put that out there that the information from those books are from the male body. And then if I look at the Master Key, which I just looked at this morning to make sure I was saying the right thing, my memory of it was correct, is that he instructs the female body in Mula Bandha to lift the cervix up. And I don't think that can be done.
It cannot be done.
Okay, so he's a male writing that book, and I'm thinking, well, where is he getting this information from?
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And I haven't read the book.
My point in saying all of this is there's a fair amount of confusion, I think, a little bit about what Mula Bandha is and what it's for. So I would like you, from Ramanand Patel's perspective, to just say, what is your understanding of what it is and why someone would do it, why you would do it?
Yeah, I would say cervix should be lifted.
Right,
It's
but it can't be from the cervix.
It can't be cervix lifting.
Right.
Okay? A very simple example would be you stand in Tadasana, and I say, oh, stand erect. And then I tell you, stand so tall that your head touches the ceiling. It obviously cannot be done. And yet, if you become logical with us and no, that's not possible, nothing will happen. Attempt to do the impossible and something happens. You are after that something. Lifting the cervix is absolutely anatomically impossible. Okay? But saying it is impossible is not at all helpful.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Try to do the impossible and see the effect. That effect is what you want. Whether the cervix lifts or not.
And how would you even know?
You would not know.
You would not know.
I would not know. In fact, nobody would know.
Exactly.
Mr. Iyengar teaching pranayama talked of molecular contact of each molecule with your nostril. And one can say, oh, that's poetry, which would be correct. He was a poet. And one can very logically say that nobody can fill molecules like that.
But if you imagine it.
But if you imagine it, something happens. That something is important.
I agree. Okay. So, do you want to tell us what Mula Bandha is?
It begins with a physical action. When somebody attempts to lift the perineum, like anatomically described, some of that effect happens. But it tightens many other things that should not be tightened.
Right. So is the practitioner not nuanced enough, or is it they have to work on not engaging so much, more subtle engagement?
Well, if I tried to engage the perineum, initially when I did it, I started to grip even my stomach.
Right.
And if I ask a child to do it, a child who loves doing yoga with me, they will grip their tongue.
Yes.
Is the pelvic floor in the tongue? Absolutely not.
But the fascia that's in the pelvic floor is connected to the tongue.
Correct.
So
that connection is the intelligence. Okay?
Yeah.
Work with that intelligence. Anything you do in the body in one part will have effect on every other part of the body. This can't be helped. Whether I have the ability to feel that sensitively or not is a separate question.
So I have a very basic question, because you've said if you do Mula Bandha incorrectly for a long time, you may not have an immediate negative effect, but over time you might. And how would someone who isn't as tuned in or astute or doesn't have a good teacher or whatever, how would they know if they're doing it incorrectly?
They won't know, but if they want to listen, this is what I would have to tell them. Check your breath.
Mm-hmm. So if it shortens the breath, not good.
Breath is amazing thing if I learn to listen to it.
Right.
Can I learn to listen to it? By practice, yes. Without practice, no.
So can you just say a little more about that particular thing? If you are engaging Mula Bandha, a physical engagement, a lift of the perineum, you are blocking the some movement of the breath moving into the legs. So what are you looking for? Not the deepest breath, physical deepest breath.
Not the legs. I would look at the abdominal pelvic organs.
Okay.
When I am trying to engage Mula Bandha, why am I gripping my stomach for a start?
When you say stomach, do you mean the abdominal muscles?
No, I
or
mean the stomach.
The stomach, okay.
That has to be let go of first. And I have to learn to separate the two. Now, when I first try to do Mula Bandha from someone teaching me, I grip my stomach. Perhaps I don't grip my jaws because I'm an advanced student, right? But I am aware that I'm gripping my stomach, which is affecting my breath. So I try to let go of that grip. Then I'm not holding the Mula Bandha properly. So it's a back and forth process.
Yeah.
Every time I engage the Mula Bandha, my perineum, I grip the stomach. When I let go of the grip of the stomach, I'm not able to hold the perineum correctly. As I keep trying again and again and again, slowly the sense comes to separate the two, that I can engage the perineum without gripping my stomach. Then I notice that, someday I have gone for a long walk, or for some reason I'm tired, and I try to engage my perineum, and the stomach again grips. So in a more subtle way, because I'm tired, I'm able to let go of, even though I'm tired, I can lift the perineum and not engage my stomach. This discovery has to become fascinating. Like, wow, I can do it. What I was not able to do some time ago, I can now do it.
Okay, so that's the what. Would you only do Mula Bandha I'd like you to say why you want to do it, and is it only done in pranayama?
No, it's not done only in pranayama. At a basic level, Mula Bandha is a muscular action.
Right.
You want to develop the musculature. So it has what we call in English language certain tone.
Yeah.
So let's compare it to biceps. My biceps are weak, let's say. I start weightlifting and to strengthen the bicep. As over a period I strengthen it, it holds a certain tone, right, at which point I'm not working it.
Right.
It's automatic.
Yeah.
Same happens to the pelvic floor.
I understand that. Yeah.
By practice, as there is some integrity of that muscular area, it holds itself. This is what is meant, that you hold Mula Bandha 24 hours a day.
I think that you saying that, though, can be misinterpreted. I know that for sure, because people have come to me and said, I thought I was supposed to be pulling up on it all the time, 24/7.
Nobody can.
I know, but still, that thought. I understand what you're saying. It should have a certain tone.
You gather that tone by a lot of practice and prayer.
Okay, and then the energetics of it in either pranayama or meditation. Are you just looking for the tone of it, is what you're saying? Or?
You are not even looking for the tone is looking for itself. You are not in contact with that activity at all in meditation. In pranayama, you may be in contact with it, particularly if you are a beginner. Because the tendency is to let go of it completely. Mm-hmm. Whereas in meditation, you cannot pay attention to that at all. Your brain doesn't have capacity to do multitasking like that.
Okay. But you're saying in the more intermediate practitioner pranayama that the pelvic floor, the perineum specifically, has enough tone that it's held, so you don't have to hold it.
You don't have to hold it.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Okay. So it is quite possible for an intermediate student, for example, to find out that I am now completely letting go of the pelvic floor integrity. So hold it and do pranayama. At least hold it while you are holding inhalation, retention, or exhalation, retention. You may not be able to hold it while inhaling or exhaling. Okay? See that difference. And slowly the body will teach you how to hold it.
So when some of the older texts of Hatha Yoga say to place your heel, either sometimes they say the anus or the perineum, is that just an outer holding of it, or is it to get your mind to connect to it? What's your interpretation of the reason for that?
See, that is told to everybody,
Yeah.
but only a few people can hold the heel in that position. Very few people. For which a lot of other asana practice is required.
Mm-hmm.
During those other activities of asana, you already learn to hold the pelvic floor correctly. So this is a contact to remind you, not to hold us.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a heel.
Doesn't have to be.
It could be like a little soft ball or a
Yeah,
cloth or something
exactly,
like that.
correct.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. Anatomically, different people have different ability to hold that. Are you reminding yourself to hold it is more important. So you're not doing inadvertently, you're not doing something opposite.
All right, so I've heard you say the experienced student holds Mula Bandha during pranayama. You just kind of addressed that. And then going back a little bit to the beginning where I was saying I see a lot of people with too much tension in their pelvic floor. Would you give them different advice, given that they want to do pranayama, they're a good student, their intentions are good, but their pelvic floor is a little on the elevated side.
Why would you give them pranayama?
Would you not? Okay, let's
I
start.
would not. I would give them asana.
Well, one of the things I agree with you. One of the things I do, and I want to check in with you, is that I give them just breath awareness practice.
That's fine.
Okay.
Not pranayama.
Not pranayama. So there's no what about Brahmari? That would be no? Really? Okay.
They're not ready for it. And
Right.
they may try it with a lot of faith, but other than that, nothing is helped.
Okay. So someone with hypertonic, overactive, short, elevated pelvic floor, I'm just saying it a couple different ways, should work on releasing that just through breath awareness and asana first before they embark on pranayama. Okay. That's pretty clear.
For a good student who has time to practice regularly, 6 to 8 months of asana practice before you introduce lying down pranayama.
And for that particular person, the one with the elevated pelvic floor, which if they, again, are doing asana and breath awareness and things are improving, what would you recommend as you're saying lying down, would you do kumbhakas?
No kumbhakas.
What would you do?
Ujjayi pranayama, inhale
Just,
and exhale.
okay.
Which is a step away, a little further from breath awareness.
Right. I'm glad you brought up Ujjayi because I just have this question in my mind and sometimes my body is when I switch over to that and I have already tense muscles here, I feel my pelvic floor a little bit. So I'm already coming from a place of disadvantage that I'm trying to get my pelvic floor to let go on a regular basis. Then I go to Ujjayi and I feel like, oh, there's a complementary closing of the pelvic floor.
So you begin, again I'm bringing in God. I don't know if that is helpful.
That's fine.
If you begin by being grateful that you're aware, this
That I'm
tightness is
noticing.
always there.
Yeah.
All that happened was you noticed it.
But when you're constricting the glottis to do the Ujjayi, as you said earlier, you can't do one thing in your body without it affecting another. I feel my pelvic floor engage.
Thank God for that.
Well, but if I'm already tight, is that a good thing?
But when you are saying you are already tight, is there a recognition that tightness is always there? All that happened was you become aware of it.
Okay, so you don't think it would be detrimental?
No.
Okay. All right.
And let me say this further. It will not be detrimental if your attitude is right. If you are doing this kind of work to, let's say, have control over other people, then it's absolutely wrong attitude. It will get you there, it will give you the power, but it will hurt you spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if the attitude is that, I'm doing this for enlightenment so I can then help other people, you can never do anything wrong. If there is a mistake, God will correct it for you. But your attitude should be right.
Okay, and that leads me to the last question, which you already kind of addressed at the very beginning, was can a yogi progress without doing Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha and all these advanced pranayamas? And
Absolutely,
your answer was yes.
Absolutely yes.
So how important is it?
Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, other bandhas will help the physical ability of the body to hold longer. Okay? But
it's not the only path.
It's not the only path. Whether you've done it in a previous incarnation or you'll get a chance to do it in the next incarnation, don't go there. Don't even debate it. Just do it. Whatever you can do. Somewhere in your questions I read bandha translated as lock. It's not. Lock is something that completely closes.
Right.
Bandha is like a dam. Think of a reservoir where you have a dam built.
Yeah.
You cannot completely block the water. If you do, that dam will break.
So that is why some of the texts say that it is, well, they say a lock, and maybe that's the interpretation, as well as a release, I believe,
Which is what, a reservoir is a good example.
Right.
Of that.
Mm-hmm.
You build a dam
Mm-hmm.
to contain the water, not block it, to contain the water. But you have to allow a regulated flow of it.
Right.
You cannot block it completely.
Okay, I have to ask you another question now. I believe a block is called a granthi. Am I saying that right?
And lock is called a granthi.
A lock, but it's a problem. It's a challenge.
Yes.
It's a happy challenge. So I believe I read it in the Master Key, but I'm not positive that that's what Mula Bandha helps with, getting rid of that blockage. But at the same time, yeah, I know. Maybe I should read the interpretation of it because I may be misquoting it. So. But he was saying it will help you contain your energy as well as it will help you release granthis.
It can, but it won't necessarily. It depends on the person.
So you don't want to think that, oh, this will take care of all my problems. Okay.
It is synonymous to somebody saying, because I practice Hatha Yoga, I will get enlightened. No, you won't.
Right.
Enlightenment has to do with confusion in your mind. If that is not addressed, no amount of Hatha Yoga practice will get you there. Hatha Yoga will give you a lot of energy.
And it will help you calm your mind down.
Not necessarily. It can agitate your mind.
Right.
If you have a bad attitude, let's say I want to kidnap Andrea, which would be wonderful. But if she doesn't want to be kidnapped and I want to kidnap her, Hatha Yoga will give me ability to kidnap her.
Right.
Not necessarily good for either me or her, or for the society.
Mm-hmm.
Hatha Yoga gives you power, Shakti. It will make you what's called Shaktishali, which is someone who has a lot of Shakti. How you use that depends on your attitude. Mm-hmm. Ravana, in our mythology, was a great yogi, but completely wrong demonic attitude. So he was killed by Ravana. Actually, Ravana is a very good example of a yogi. That you can be very powerful, but you can use that power for wrong things.
Right.
And today we have nuclear energy and horrible capacity.
Right.
Okay? You can use it for very, very, very good things. Okay? And you can use it to destroy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good metaphor.
And the fault will not be with nuclear energy. Fault will be with the person who uses it.
Right.
The idea that nuclear energy is bad, I don't agree with that. Nuclear energy only bad because it falls in the hands of wrong people. Now, why those people became wrong is history.
This has been really interesting. I hope you'll agree to another talk with me.
I will agree because I like the talk, because as I talk something gets clear in my head also. But suppose I'm not available for any more talks. Rely on God.
Okay, I will if she's available.
He is available.
She is available.
He is available.
And we'll leave it there.